Ella Turner tightened the stiff collar of her plain black uniform as she stood at the grand entrance of the Marlowe estate. The sprawling mansion loomed before her, its tall windows glowing warmly against the twilight sky. Inside, she knew, guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns would soon be sipping champagne beneath crystal chandeliers, the sound of polite laughter filling the air. It was a world Ella had grown accustomed to observing from the sidelines, a dazzling world of wealth and privilege that felt as distant and unreachable as the stars. As a single mother to 6-year-old Lucas, Ella's life revolved around survival. The Marlowe estate provided her with a paycheck that she couldn't afford to lose, even if it meant enduring the occasional condescension from the wealthy guests, or worse, William Marlowe himself. Once known as a charming and generous man, William had become cold and distant after the loss of his wife, Eleanor. Now he was infamous for his sharp tongue and the quiet cruelty he reserved for those he deemed unworthy of his attention. Ella, however, could not afford the luxury of pride. Every shift she worked, every tray she carried, brought her closer to her goal of giving Lucas a better life. Her days of dreaming about playing the piano professionally, an ambition she had once clung to fiercely, were long gone, buried beneath the demands of motherhood and an endless list of bills. The grand hall of the Marlowe estate buzzed with activity as guests arrived, their laughter and the clinking of glasses echoing beneath the high vaulted ceilings. Ella moved through the crowd with practiced precision, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres while keeping her gaze down. She had mastered the art of invisibility in places like this, just another uniformed figure blending into the background. As the evening progressed, Ella's eyes were drawn, almost against her will, to the grand piano in the far corner of the room. Its polished ebony surface gleamed under the chandelier's soft glow. For a fleeting moment, she felt a pang of longing. Music had once been her sanctuary, a part of herself she had loved deeply before life had demanded more practical sacrifices. Admiring the piano, are we? The sharp, mocking voice cut through Ella's thoughts, and her stomach sank. She turned to find William Marlowe standing behind her, a glass of whiskey in hand, his piercing gaze fixed on her. His tone was deceptively light, but Ella could sense the edge beneath it. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly, lowering her eyes. She had learned to tread carefully in conversations with William, whose words often carried a cruelty that stung worse than any physical blow. But tonight, William seemed determined to push her further. "Why don't you show us what you've got?" he said, his lips curling into a cold smile. The room fell silent as his words carried, and heads turned toward Ella. Her breath caught. He couldn't be serious. She wasn't here to entertain, she was here to serve. But the weight of his gaze, coupled with the murmurs from the crowd, left her no room to refuse. "I'm really not," she began, but William cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Nonsense. Surely someone with such an interest in the instrument knows how to play." Ella's heart pounded as a wave of humiliation washed over her. She glanced around, feeling the stares of the guests, some amused, others curious. Lucas's face flashed in her mind, his wide, trusting eyes reminding her of why she was here. Taking a deep breath, she stepped toward the piano, her legs feeling like lead. Her fingers trembled as they hovered over the keys, the weight of 100 stares pressing down on her like a tidal wave. She pressed the first note, soft but steady, and then another. The melody unfolded, hesitant at first, but soon Ella was lost in the music. As her hands moved across the keys, the room transformed. The whispers faded, replaced by silence so profound it felt like the mansion itself was holding its breath. As Ella played, the music took on a life of its own. It was a piece she hadn't touched in years, one she used to practice on the old, out-of-tune piano in her childhood home. The melody carried her back to simpler times, before responsibility had stolen her freedom to dream. Her fingers, though unpracticed, moved with increasing confidence as the notes flowed effortlessly, filling the room with a quiet, aching beauty. The crowd, which had initially watched her with detached curiosity, now seemed captivated. The air grew heavy with something unspoken, and Ella could feel the shift. Heads tilted, eyes softened, and conversations ceased. Even the most indifferent guests leaned closer, drawn into the raw emotion of the moment. Ella didn't dare look up. She kept her focus on the keys, pouring every ounce of herself into the music. She let it tell the story she couldn't put into words. The story of sacrifice, love, and the unyielding hope she carried for Lucas. When the final note rang out, the room hung in stunned silence. For a moment, Ella feared she had done something wrong. Then, like a gentle ripple, the applause began. It started with a single pair of hands, then another, until the room erupted in a wave of admiration. Ella blinked, dazed, as she slowly stood from the bench. Her chest heaved as she tried to process what had just happened. The applause wasn't polite or forced. It was genuine, filled with awe. For the first time in years, Ella felt seen. At the back of the room, William Marlowe stood motionless, his glass of whiskey untouched. His usual smirk had vanished, replaced by an expression Ella couldn't decipher. There was something raw in his gaze, a vulnerability that caught her off guard. Finally, he stepped forward, the crowd parting around him like the sea. Ella tensed, expecting a cutting remark or another display of his power. But when he spoke, his voice was uncharacteristically quiet. "You played beautifully," he said, his tone lacking its usual sharpness. "My wife used to play that piece." Ella's breath hitched. She had heard whispers from the other staff about William's late wife, Eleanor, a woman known for her warmth and grace. The mention of her name seemed to unravel something in William. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time his eyes softened, revealing not a powerful tycoon, but a man burdened by sorrow and loss. The music unraveling walls he had spent years building. "I owe you an apology," he continued, his voice steady but heavy. "What I did earlier wasn't fair. I thought—" He trailed off, glancing away as if ashamed. "I thought it would amuse me, but I was wrong." Ella was too stunned to respond. This was the last thing she had expected from a man like William Marlowe. Before she could gather her thoughts, he added, "You have a gift, and it would be a waste not to use it. Let me help you." Ella hesitated as she stood outside the towering doors of the conservatory. The grand building seemed to loom over her, its marble facade radiating a sense of importance and sophistication that made her feel small. But behind her stood Lucas, holding her hand tightly, his wide eyes filled with awe. His presence grounded her, reminding her why she was here. After that fateful night at the Marlowe estate, William had approached Ella again with an offer that felt too surreal to accept. He wanted to sponsor her studies at the city's prestigious conservatory, giving her a chance to rekindle the dreams she had buried long ago. At first, she refused. The idea of returning to school as a single mother in her 30s seemed impossible. But William was insistent, and Lucas's excited plea, "Mom, you have to do it," was the final push she needed. Now, standing in the conservatory's ornate hallways, Ella felt a strange mix of exhilaration and fear. Most of the other students were decades younger than her, their confidence and polished skills a stark contrast to her own rusty talent. The first few weeks were grueling. Between classes, relentless practice sessions, and working evenings at William's events, Ella barely had time to catch her breath. The gap between her and her peers was undeniable. Many of them came from wealthy families, their paths paved with opportunities Ella had never known. There were moments when she questioned her decision, wondering if she had bitten off more than she could chew. But Ella's professors quickly noticed something unique about her. While others played with technical precision, Ella's music carried a depth of emotion that was impossible to teach. Her life experiences, the sacrifices, the struggles, the love she had for Lucas, added a richness to her performances that captivated her audience. Slowly, her confidence began to grow. Meanwhile, Lucas thrived in this new chapter of their lives. Inspired by his mother's dedication, he asked her to teach him how to play. Their evenings, once filled with hurried meals and exhaustion, now revolved around the piano. Lucas's little fingers stumbled at first, but Ella's patient guidance soon revealed his natural talent. One evening, as they sat side by side at the piano, Lucas looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Mom, do you think I can play like you someday?" he asked, his voice filled with hope and awe, his small hands mimicking hers on the edge of the piano. Ella smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You can do anything you set your mind to, sweetheart," she said, ruffling his hair. At the same time, William's transformation was becoming evident. The events at his estate, once defined by extravagance and status, began to take on a new purpose. Ella's music had inspired him to turn his parties into meaningful gatherings, raising funds for local charities and community projects. The cold, isolating grandeur of his home was replaced with warmth and purpose, creating a ripple effect that reached far beyond his estate. As the months turned into years, Ella's dedication bore fruit. She became a standout at the conservatory, earning praise not only from her professors, but also from audiences at recitals. Word of her talent spread, and she began receiving invitations to perform at events outside William's sphere. But no matter how busy she became, Ella never lost sight of what mattered most. Lucas, the piano, became their shared sanctuary, a symbol of how far they had come. Every note she played, every chord Lucas learned, reminded them both that dreams didn't have to stay buried. They could rise again, stronger than ever. The Marlowe estate had undergone a profound transformation. Once a monument to wealth and excess, it had become a hub of purpose and generosity. William Marlowe, who had once wielded his fortune to humiliate and isolate, now used it to uplift others. It began subtly, with smaller, more intimate gatherings that prioritized connection over spectacle. Ella's music became the soul of these events, drawing guests into moments of quiet reflection and shared humanity. Inspired by her talent and resilience, William redirected his focus. His parties were no longer about flaunting status, but about making a tangible difference. Over time, his events grew into fundraisers that supported causes close to his heart: scholarships for young musicians, community programs for underprivileged children, and music education in schools. The guests, initially skeptical of this shift, quickly embraced the change. They donated generously, moved not only by the causes, but by the authenticity behind them. Ella played a central role in these evenings. Her music set the tone, imbuing the events with warmth and sincerity. With each performance, she reminded everyone present of the power of art to heal and inspire. As her reputation grew, she began to attract opportunities beyond the estate. Yet she remained loyal to the man who had given her a second chance, performing at his events not out of obligation, but out of shared purpose. Lucas, too, became a symbol of this transformation. The little boy who had once marveled at the grandeur of the Marlowe estate was now thriving in ways Ella had never imagined. His piano lessons, both at home and with professional instructors, revealed a prodigious talent. Guests often asked about him, and William himself took pride in watching the young boy grow. In William's eyes, Ella and Lucas represented hope, a reminder that even in the face of loss and regret, people could find redemption. He threw himself into his charitable endeavors with renewed fervor, ensuring his wealth served as a force for good. The estate, once a cold fortress, was now a place where lives were changed. Guests no longer came to marvel at its grandeur, but to be part of something meaningful. And at the heart of it all was Ella, whose journey had inspired not only William, but an entire community to embrace the power of transformation. The evening of the benefit concert was one Ella would never forget. The Marlowe estate, now a beacon of community and compassion, buzzed with quiet anticipation. Guests filled the grand hall, their conversations subdued as they awaited the evening's performance. A mother and son duet that had become the highlight of the night. Ella stood backstage with Lucas, her hands gently resting on his small shoulders. At just 10 years old, Lucas had grown into a confident and talented young musician, his love for the piano rivaling her own. He fidgeted nervously with the cuffs of his shirt, his excitement bubbling just beneath the surface. "Mom," he whispered, his voice tinged with both awe and apprehension. "What if I mess up?" Ella knelt to his level, taking his hands in hers. "Do you remember what I always tell you?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Feel the music, don't think about it." "Exactly," she said, smiling. "And remember, no matter what, I'm right here with you." A voice announced their names, and the audience erupted in polite applause as Ella and Lucas stepped onto the stage. The grand piano stood gleaming under the chandelier's soft light, a symbol of how far they had come. Ella and Lucas exchanged a quick, reassuring glance before taking their seats side by side. The first notes rang out, soft and deliberate. Ella led the way, her fingers gliding effortlessly across the keys. Lucas followed, his smaller hands mimicking hers with precision and grace. Their music unfolded like a story, each note weaving together years of sacrifice, hope, and love. As they played, the crowd leaned in, captivated by the harmony between mother and son. The piece shifted from delicate and introspective to bold and triumphant, a reflection of their journey. Lucas's confidence grew with each passing moment, and Ella couldn't help but smile as she watched him lose himself in the music. When the final note hung in the air, a hush fell over the room. Then, like a wave, the applause began. Soft at first, then swelling into a thunderous ovation. Ella stood, her chest heaving with emotion, and took Lucas's hand as they bowed together. In the crowd, Ella spotted William, standing at the back of the room. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes shone with pride. For a man who had once been consumed by bitterness, this moment marked his own transformation. As the applause continued, Ella turned to Lucas, who beamed up at her. "You did amazing," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You too, Mom," he replied, squeezing her hand. The night marked more than just a performance. It was the culmination of their journey, a vivid declaration of triumph over hardship, and proof that dreams, no matter how long deferred, could still be realized. For Ella, it was proof that dreams didn't die, they simply waited for the right time to be reborn. And for Lucas, it was the beginning of a future filled with possibility. Together, they had found not just their place in the world, but in each other's hearts, bound forever by the music they shared.